Hello, everybody. My name's Jesse Weaver. I'm a product manager on the logging and metrics team. Been working as a product manager on that team for about a year or so now. Previously a software developer with Pivotal, now Vmware. We're here to talk to you about app logging in Cloud Foundry for Kubernetes. And I am joined by...
Hi there, my name is Travis Patterson. I'm an engineer on the logging and metrics team. I've been working on the team for just under 3 years, and I've worked in sort of a capacity as sort of an engineer and also the anchor on the team. And sort of I've kind of seen the evolution from kind of what we were to what we're trying to get to. And so what we're going to talk about today is some of that history I just mentioned, kind of where the logging system came from and sort of what informed our design decisions as we move forward, what the new thing looks like, CF Kate's logging, how to use it. And by how to use it, we're talking about sort of the expectations that you can have of the contracts around it and the APIs. And then sort of like what's next for the logging system? What kind of ideas do we have to make it like better or more useful? And so we've kind of got a short history. The old logging system, or the current logging system, I guess, in CF is called Logregator. And it is essentially designed to vacuum up all of the application logs from the platform and egress them out of a single API endpoint that we've historically called the fire hose. It facilitates this sort of like pub sub kind of interaction where operators or users can ask for usually some sort of filtered subset of the logs or everything at once to facilitate integrations with the platform. It was designed to scale pretty large. So large foundations can commonly emit hundreds of thousands of logs and metrics a second. And was also designed to sort of give integrators the option to filter and aggregate the metrics and logs in ways that they found useful. Over the years, we've introduced several APIs. The first one being the sort of vanilla V1 firehose. This gives you all of the logs and metrics, or just all of the metrics. So the filtering there is pretty coarse-grained. Then we introduced a V2 API, and that gives you sort of some more fine-grained filtering capabilities. So you can sort of ask for logs from only a small subset of apps, or you can ask for only a subset of metrics in addition to logs, or any combination of those two. And finally, what we've done is for that V2 API, there are two different ways that you can integrate with it. One is via gRPC, via a Bosch deployed component, or an app that's sort of poked a security hole in to be able to access that, or through an HTTP API where we stream the logs via JSON back to you.
And so Logregator has evolved to meet these needs, and it's done a pretty good job of it. It's managed to hit a lot of these throughput goals. It's managed to service a lot of these use cases. But that hasn't come without pain, unfortunately. One of the biggest pains that people trying to work on this system, people trying to operate this system run into, is the complexity of the architecture involved. What we see here is kind of the full flow left to right of logs and metrics from the system's components, applications that are producing them through a couple of routing tiers to their final destination. And this works, but it's difficult to understand all of the flows that you need, and it goes pretty concretely into the next pain point: scaling this whole system. So each one of these hops, as logs and metrics travel through, has their own complex scaling criteria. There are metrics that need to be understood. There are best practices in terms of VM sizing that need to be understood. And understanding a final symptom of logs aren't coming out, metrics aren't coming out, my developers are unhappy, my stakeholders are unhappy, requires understanding this whole chain and making sure that each part of it is healthy. This last pain that folks run into affects even people outside of the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, because most of the components and formats that are used within Logregator are ones that have been originated within Logregator, within the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. For instance, everything must consume the Logregator envelope format containing those logs and metrics. This format has a V1 and a V2 variant with some subtly different semantics. And logging is the original focus of all of this. Metrics have been lumped into this same pipeline within this same envelope format. So their transport is tied together, even though your expectations of how many logs need to make it to a destination are probably very different than your expectation of how many metrics need to get to their final destination. And like they're both part of this same push-based, single event-based format. And dealing with this API only helps integrators deal with Cloud Foundry. This is something that needs to be replicated across each individual integrator or developer wanting to work with Cloud Foundry. And that's not going to buy them much on any other platform.
So let's talk about where we've ended up. And so the first thing we'll notice about our new architecture is that it's dramatically simpler. And what we've done is we've focused it around a fluentd daemon set. We've also focused it around a couple of core use cases. One of those being egress of the platform's application logs to some sort of third-party integration service, something like Splunk or Papertrail or something like that, or sending logs in such a way that they could be accessed from the CF CLI for your CF logs command. So for application logs or things like build container logs, any sort of pod that has containers that have got associated app IDs, we just deploy a tail input plugin with our fluentds, and we sort of tail all the logs on all of the nodes, and we slurp up the ones that are associated with apps. We curate the metadata a little bit, and then we send those logs along to one of these sort of third-party or CF logs integrations. If there are other components that want their logs to be intermingled within the app's log stream, and sort of examples of this are the routing tier for requests coming and going, and some CAPI logs for things like how your app is staging and where it is in that life cycle. We have introduced a Fluent Forward API that components can just send to. Components have decided to do this in a couple of different ways. It's pretty flexible. So some components have just pulled in the logging libraries provided by Fluent, and there's one for several languages. And others have actually sort of deployed their own Fluent bit sidecars. Sort of the crux of this is that each component gets to decide how it handles its logs because it's sort of the expert in those logs. And what we do as the logging layer is sort of make the guarantee that if you send logs that have a log or an app ID to our API, we'll make sure that they get where they need to go. To service CF logs, it's actually, we treat this use case as just a subset of a third-party integrator using the log cache component that we're bringing over from CF for Bosch. We've turned this into a syslog server, and we just receive the messages sent from the fluentd daemon set. The CF CLI now sort of goes to the log cache to pull stuff down, and this cache of logs services both the needs of like a log's recent experience, where we look into the recent past, or streaming current logs to see what's going on now. And sort of via the same API, we can send things to external integrators, like again, Splunk or Papertrail, or really anything that understands this syslog RFC 5424 format, so that we can sort of egress to some sort of third-party aggregator. And so we've got some new sort of like contracts and assumptions in this logging architecture than what we had before. And one of them is this idea of distributed log delivery. No longer is there a single endpoint where all of your logs sort of are egressed to. So there's no more firehose. The firehose in our experience was used mostly for third-party integrations. And we find that integrating is simpler if we treat those integrations as a generic syslog server. And so any integration that you want to have with a platform now just needs to understand simple RFC 5424. This could be an rsyslog cluster, or it can be any one of those third-party tools. Namely, sort of aggregation of logs is difficult, and there are a bunch of products that do this really well. So our goal is to make a contract that makes getting logs from the platform as easy as possible. And a second big one is back pressure. Historically, the logging pipeline has made guarantees around never putting back pressure on apps. And this has sort of led to other decisions like the logging pipeline losing or dropping logs rather than stopping the emission of apps from the emission of logs from apps. And so in CF for K8s, all of the apps first log to their container's file system. So there's intrinsic back pressure. And so if an app logs too much or too quickly, it might be throttled by the apps or by the file system. And as a result, we now consider back pressure sort of part of the assumption of the way the system is built, and we'll favor that instead of dropping logs. And sort of as I've already touched on, we really want to coalesce around community standard formats. We found that integrating against sort of proprietary, if open standards has caused pain for integrators. And so we want to make this as easy as possible and just use syslog with structured data. The structured data holds either what's in, holds just the metadata. And sort of as a fun aside, we've actually created a FluentD plugin that facilitates the egress of syslog RFC 5424 from whatever is coming into a Fluent. So this hopefully helps integrators have a set of building blocks that they can use. And then sort of gone is the idea of independent scaling. Because this is a FluentD daemon set, there's a logging sort of process on each one of the K8s nodes. And so as you scale out your platform to service more workloads, you intrinsically scale out your logging layer so that hopefully it keeps up with the amount of logs that you are producing so that you can sort of egress them to where they're most useful.
And having achieved via this new architecture with its new contracts, having achieved the baseline experience of, I want my developers to be able to see their application logs through CF logs, and I would like to take the whole foundation's logs and send them somewhere else via syslog. We have a few things on the horizon that we're looking to achieve. One of the biggest ones is the concept of a resource drain. For a long time within the Cloud Foundry logging system, it's been possible to set up, you might have heard a few different names for it, a app log drain, a cups drain, any number of things. But critically, taking an application's logs and sending them to some outside destination. Now, this is useful, but oftentimes what you care about is not an app. It's some larger unit of abstraction, somewhere between an app and an entire foundation. So we hope to make it easy and declarative using some of the new annotations features within the CF API. We hope to make it possible to egress all of the logs for all the apps in an org or all the apps in a space. The next thing that we have coming up that we're looking to bring in is per app throughput throttling. This is something that has come into the Cloud Foundry on Bosch ecosystem somewhat recently. And it's a super useful feature that we want to preserve going forward in CF for K8s. Any individual noisy actor, any individual app that's submitting just tons of logs shouldn't be able to overwhelm its own logging node or anything downstream. And last, but certainly not least, while we've really worked to eliminate shared APIs, shared pain points that all of the logs going through the system have to flow through, there is still log cache servicing the CF logs API, serving logs to CF logs. And we want to make sure that that is highly available. If one node goes down, developers should still be able to see logs for their apps coming through when they're pushing, monitoring, what have you. Thank you very much for spending time with us. You can reach us via email, even better. In the Cloud Foundry Slack, we have a channel, Logging and Metrics, where we would love for you to join us. Any conversations, requests, comments, anything that is the top of your mind. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, friends. Take care. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hooray. I was typing an answer while the person was asking stuff, and I was like, oh no. Come ask questions.
Oh. Okay, now I am not hearing your voice and my voice.
Yeah, that was a little rough.
Very disorienting. Okay. I'm going to keep that page open because apparently the questions don't magically port themselves over to this breakout room. But
Fair enough. We got sort of, looks like one question. I've sort of been trying to answer stuff as it came in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see.
Let's see if we have folks here yet. Oh, it seems like it puts all the people in here though. Questions.
Any thoughts on making log cache an optional component? Gonna answer that one live. Okay, so we have a question in the chat from Bernd Kranich about making log cache an optional component. This is something we hadn't yet considered. Log cache is pretty critical for pushing apps and viewing their logs through the CF/CLI currently. If neither of those are use cases that were used within a particular installation of CF for K8s, I think we could have a chat about making those optional. But at this time, presently, they're so integrated that we haven't offered that. Let's see. Next one, we have a question on metrics. Travis, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, sure. So right now what we've been doing is sort of servicing the base metrics use case for sort of like the CF app experience from the CF CLI. And there's sort of a team and work is ongoing to see what metrics look like in CF for K8s going forward. Critically, we sort of don't want them to be in log cache anymore because sort of the things that Jesse mentioned in the talk, where kind of putting metrics in the log cache is kind of the worst of all worlds. So we're sort of working to see what kind of first-class metrics experience we can put together for that.
And I am typing up some of these questions and answers and dropping them into our Slack channel, logging and metrics in the Cloud Foundry Slack. Also, if you have any further questions, we have an office hours next Tuesday. I believe it's at 1800 UTC. That is on the CF community calendar. Excellent. We have a question from Jovan Kostovsky asking about the shared nothing architecture. I'm guessing this is the shared nothing architecture from the Bosch world, CF deployment world. This is something, yeah, it's been considered experimental in some ways for quite some time. This is something that we actually have a fair amount of confidence in as it has gotten more and more used, especially within some alternate deployments of CF. I wouldn't consider it experimental at this point. We don't have as many integrations with the shared nothing architecture as perhaps we might hope, but a lot of the components of it, especially the syslog agent, have been proven out fairly well at scale.
And then we got another question about sort of the lossiness of log cache. Log cache has got sort of a lossy profile, not super the same as the old logging pipeline where it sort of drops stuff on the floor. If it gets super overwhelmed, it will do that, but it will sort of favor throttling and back pressure in CF for K8s over dropping stuff. And sort of the critical thing to realize about log cache is that it's just sort of an in-memory cache of logs, where as logs come in, the oldest ones are expired. And right now, because we're servicing the sort of like CF logs and CF logs recent use cases with that, the cache for each app is only the last 1,000 things. And so if your app is logging tons and tons of things, it will keep the last 1,000 things, but it'll sort of like continuously expire them. And so it's really good for getting just a really recent cache of the logs, but it's not good for sort of persistent or even sort of like medium-term storage. Any other questions this morning or this evening, I guess, wherever we happen to be located? So we're just about at time.
Hasn't kicked us out yet. I don't know if this stays
I'm not sure.
until
I'm not sure if it's going to kick us out. So if it doesn't, please continue to ask questions. Otherwise, please hit us up in the logging and metrics channel, or come to one of our office hours. We're sort of like really excited to talk to the community and answer questions and sort of understand what folks want or need.
Oh, excellent. We have a couple of questions coming in.
Nice, perfect.
I'll take the first one about input and output plugins in
Sure.
FluentD. So as to custom input and output plugins in FluentD, this isn't a capability that we're offering just yet, but it's a use case that we'd love to talk about more. The trick about using FluentD for our use case, where we're pulling from very specific sources, filtering metadata in very specific ways, and wanting to get it to downstream destinations, is that we have to be pretty careful about how we integrate some of these customizations. Custom output plugins are probably the most feasible bit of custom config. That's not something we have on the roadmap, but I can definitely drop that in as something to consider. And if you have any like further clarifications, anything you'd like to discuss, please join us in Slack. We'd love to hear more.
And then to sort of the use case around Logcache. Logcache isn't so much for integrating with downstream consumers. Logcache is just for integrating, for the most part, with CF logs or CF logs recent or any consumer you want that has got a similar sort of usage profile. In general, in CF for Kates for integrating with downstream consumers, what we're trying to favor is sort of a syslog server, so maybe even an rsyslog cluster, so that the nodes can each individually egress their own logs to some sort of downstream aggregator, something like a Splunk or a Papertrail or any of those products that do kind of a really good job at aggregating tons and tons of logs.
I'd say, Travis, if we don't have any more questions by 7:45, maybe 7:50, we close out the room. Sound like a plan?
I think that is super reasonable.
Excellent. although I may delay that until I'm finished typing up the questions and answers.
Okay, it is 7:45 now. Any last questions before we go?
And Travis, if you would like to drop off, I can stay in because I'm not sure if the Q&A will persist if I drop out of the room. So.
Oh, that's fair. That sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to stick around too, Jesse, while you're here to like answer questions and stuff.
In fact, maybe what would be more effective, I'll just copy this and then we can do it that way. We have computers with all of these magical capabilities like saving text in files. Okay, where is this? How do I add a new note? Okay, cool. That's all been saved. All right. Then I think we're probably good to close out. Thank you all so much for your time. Hope to see you in office hours or Slack.
Take care.